crypto is making headlines almost every single day. But what are some of the top issues that we, the CPAs, can help our clients about now and going forward? This is the NJCPA If You Want podcast. Welcome back to the NJCPA Issues Much podcast. I'm your host for everything tech related, Stein Smith, and I'm thrilled to be joined back here today on the podcast by a colleague, friend, and actually now partner over at Witham in the emerging technology group. Mark, it's a blast to have you back on.
Sean, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. It's good to reconnect.
Absolutely. I was just going back and forth with Mark off the air that it's probably been 2.5 years, 3 years since I've actually been in the same room with Mark face to face. So, gonna try to fix that going forward.
Yeah, 2025. We got a lot to cover, but let's make that happen for sure this year.
Absolutely. And so, Mark, for anybody here in the audience who is not familiar with you or your group over at Witham, want to give us a sort of quick introduction of you and your team and all of that good stuff.
Definitely. So Mark Eckerle, I'm a audit partner here at Witham. I'm in our emerging technology practice, which is the second largest sector or industry that we service. Been with the firm for about 8 to 9 years. I'm also the firm's team leader of our digital asset and blockchain technology group. And that covers both our technology practice as well as our financial services team when you think of investment and hedge fund companies that are in the digital asset space. Witham is a top 20 firm, and we service across all industry verticals, right? So audit, tax, advisory. So when it comes to digital assets, it's a space that we're tackling head on and in all three industry verticals.
Excellent stuff, Mark. And I think Mark's being a little too humble here too. So I know Mark's been interested in blockchain, crypto, going all the way back to well before it was a mainstream topic. So I always love having this opportunity to catch up and to really sort of have his point of view on these issues as topics around obviously Bitcoin, but also taxes for other crypto issues, how to audit holdings and all the rest are now moving off the back burner and off the front burner.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that we haven't been in a room for 2.5 years and how much has happened in this space
Yeah,
because it's really it feels like a lifetime, right? I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I've been with them for 8 to 9 years, but I before I joined the firm, I had digital asset experience on the audit and accounting side. So I have roughly 10 years under my belt in this space, which is an eternity when you think of how far we've come since 2015. But no, it's exciting to see what's new and upcoming every single year because it keeps us on the edge of our seats. It keeps us innovative, and it's one of the things I love most about this industry with digital assets, blockchain technology is there's no stagnation. It's always something new, always something exciting that we have to look forward to.
absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I would say going back to when I first heard of Stone blockchain, I didn't have any gray hairs and I didn't have the beard yet either. And so now I have both. But it's a whole separate conversation. So in in terms of like the top issues, right? Because obviously, crypto had a big summer in 2024, bigger fall in the run up to the uh, election, and then obviously, almost every week there are headlines, orders based around crypto coming out of the White House. But in terms of the top issues that you and your team are actually seeing on the everyday, are there any top two or three items out there?
Yeah, I think when you look back for the last 12 months or so, 2024 was an interesting year for digital assets. I think there was a lot of patient folks, investors, companies just trying to see where the election was going to go, which direction to help see how that was going to impact the space as a whole. And I think when you look at just price point standalone from that point of view, in November, that was really telling for the industry of where we're going to go for the next couple of years, because Bitcoin was hitting all-time highs in November post-election. It's cooled off a little bit since. I think we've gotten a little flat from those wild rides in late Q4, maybe early January. Um, but I think there's a lot of good things in the pipeline. And when I say that, a lot of that is on the regulatory front. So what we've seen just so far here, end of March, 3 months into 2025, there's been a lot of stuff in motion, right? A couple of things that come to mind are President Trump created the crypto task force, right? So bringing together uh, like-minded folks within government to try and steer and provide some direction and regulatory clarity that we've been hoping for years now. So folks from key agencies like the SEC, the CFTC, Department of Treasury, they're all trying to come together to bring digital asset related regulations to the forefront. And those meetings will be public, so anyone can jump in at any point in time and listen in to what they're working on actively. I believe they just had the first one a couple weeks ago.
Mhm. Yep.
Um, Additionally, President Trump signed an executive order that effectively said we will block the creation of a central bank digital currency, which was, um, I don't want to say groundbreaking, but it was, I think it eased a lot of people's minds as to where the US is going to approach the digital asset space because we saw other nations creating central bank digital currency. So it was kind of curious to see where we were going to fit into this whole ecosystem, um, which parlays directly into the Genius Act, which was announced a couple months ago, to help provide a framework for stable coins, right? So while the US isn't going to create their own central bank digital currency, effectively a stable coin issued by the US government, we're promoting the current ecosystem of stable coins, which in my opinion is going to be the number one mainstream adopter for digital assets in this space, right? I think that's easy for people to denominate in their minds. It's easy to transact, and it'll get people familiar with digital transactions and understanding like wallet mechanics. But stepping aside from the regulatory front there and saying on the same vein as the Genius Act, what came out a couple, I think earlier this month, a couple weeks ago, was the regulatory clarity from the AICPA on
Yep.
stablecoin guidance, right? So
Big deal
if you
there.
were, yeah, 2 years ago, right, with the whole FTX situation, um, a lot of exchanges and token issuers were scrambling for these proof of reserves reportings. And there was a lot of accounting firms that were doing it different, right? There was no structured framework, there was no guidance as to how these reports should look and feel. Um, and the only regulatory body that had issued any type of clarity on this front was the New York Department of Financial Services about 2 years ago, saying we need these explicit disclosures in our report. The only caveat with that is not every stablecoin issuer is under the jurisdiction of the New York Department of Financial Services. So
Minor
the
detail.
yeah, the
Minor detail.
AICPA coming out with this framework for token issuers to follow, and make sure that the reporting requirements are going to all look and feel the same is going to be critical for firms like us, like Witham, to make sure we're abiding by the guidelines set forth by our regulatory bodies. So, just a few of the things that have been announced so far to date. I know that was a long-winded answer, but a lot of exciting things, and I think we're moving in the direction of clarity, which is something we've hoped for a while now.
Yeah. And obviously the whole digital asset conversation or on-chain asset conversation is fast moving. There are all kinds of moving pieces also in there. But yeah, I mean, the overall pivot and tone has moved one towards trying to give institutions, investors, and CPAs, trying to offer services, more transparency and some more clarity, which I think is always good.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so I have to ask you, Mark, right? This whole idea of an SBR, right? A strategic Bitcoin uh, reserve. What do you think about that? In the context of these pro token policy changes, how does the idea of an SBR actually sort of factor into that?
yeah, I think you see what El Salvador has done
Hmm.
for digital assets and how they've adopted it as a currency, and they're thriving right now under their current administration. Um, So I think a lot of folks were trying to mirror what they have done, and that's not necessarily how the US is going to approach it. But I think shifting some of our reserve assets to something like Bitcoin, or if it has to be a pool, because I know, right, to clarify for our listeners, they're going to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which is just made up of Bitcoin. But then if
Correct.
anyone was privy to the announcement that came out, there was a variety of other digital assets, right? So
Yep.
what are they going to do with that?
Hmm.
I think the term they used was stockpile, where they're
Yes,
going to
correct.
have
Digital asset stockpile.
a
Yeah.
digital asset stockpile of some of these other called blue chip crypto assets, right? So they're going to be mingling into both, but I think as a hedge against inflation, as a hedge against other currencies, it's a great investment to kind of counteract some of the properties of gold, right? So that the fact that they're going to be using some gold reserves to purchase Bitcoin is very telling. But it's also helped driving innovation in the United States, right? It's showing that we are staying on the emerging forefront with our technology companies. I think a lot of other nation states are going to follow suit with the United States, which only helps provide our business case as a country to have this
Hmm.
because it's going to help drive supply and demand. So I mean, I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be very eye-opening to a lot of companies. If the US is going to be having a Bitcoin reserve, I think a lot of companies are going to follow suit by putting it on their balance sheet.
I assume so, yes. And to add just one point to the transparency here, I don't believe that there was any timeline for having the US government actually buying more Bitcoin as of right now. Because I know there are people that are on both angles, right, of this. And so as of right now, there is no timeline for having the government buy additional Bitcoin. The SBR at this point in time is only going to be comprised of the current holdings of the US government that until now have been held in other accounts
Mhm.
via or that had been seized via court order and all the rest. So as of right now, there is no tax money being spent on any of these
Yep.
additional crypto assets. I would like to make sure to be, totally
No,
good about that.
it's a great point
Just to be
because I
sure.
think, and it goes with a lot of what we'd be discussing today, right? Because a lot of folks, when they get into digital assets, right, it's buzzwords, it's hot topics, it's
Yeah.
cool, right? And it's great to have that clarity because I could easily see the business case where President Trump would make the announcement of a strategic Bitcoin reserve and then nothing really happens of it, right? It's just that flashy headline. So making that point and showing that, okay, there's no open market purchases to date. Here's what it's going to be made up of. And maybe who knows when we'll cross that bridge. But it's always important because I think, as you'll see with the space, there's a lot of flashy headlines and cool things to be doing.
Absolutely. And um, say building on that, let's comment, Mark. Obviously, there are headlines that are around Bitcoin, around crypto, and the Trump White House has been openly pro crypto and pro innovation, right? So how are your current clients sort of handling that, right? Uh, one, in terms of the optics of it, right? Because there are politics involved in everything. And two, in terms of, is there any indication that by introducing acts like the Genius Act or the Stable Act, both of which are targeted to try to get dollar-backed tokens into the mainstream, is there any inkling, are there any current conversations about clients moving more towards crypto being used, either on the balance sheet or as a medium of doing business?
Yeah, what we're seeing a lot, especially a lot of companies like in the proposal stage that are coming to us now. Again, me being an auditor coming in late, I'm not a tax guy, right? So companies from day one need a tax advisor. But when I really come into play is when companies have that audit requirement.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing a lot of companies start to peruse and talk about is the potential IPO readiness, right? I think as we've
Mhm.
had some of this pro administration, it's also on the SEC forefront that it's going to be not necessarily easier, but you're not going to get as much pushback being a
Hmm.
digital asset company trying to go public and be a PCOB registrant. So a lot of people thinking of the IPO route for their business, where the future they could go in the next year or two. So we're having a lot of those discussions. Like a lot of other companies, we're seeing a lot of folks toss around the idea of moving some treasury assets into a digital asset for a long-term investment. Um, so kind of working with them to show what are the internal controls, the risks around doing so. It's very different than a cash account and setting that up. So making sure they understand that from the beginning before going down that route, because once you do that, it's tough to go back. You don't want to make any fat finger mistakes or anything like that when you're setting that stuff up. So making sure they understand the risks and talking them through the various hurdles there. But the other piece that I think could open the door for a lot of companies is uh, the fact that when President Trump came into office was he repealed SAB 121, right? So there was a big compliance hurdle there, like you mentioned, on the compliance forefront with SAB, ironic, SAB 122 repealed SAB 121, not to get confused, but that was a big compliance hurdle for companies that were custodying client assets, right? So having the corresponding liability and asset on the books on your balance sheet, and almost acting as like a bank, where a lot of these companies where facilitating like almost like money transmitters and trying to act as a middleman, where do they fit in the crypto landscape under that compliance? So I think repealing that helps open the doors a little bit and ease the financial burden on a lot of companies that might not want to go down that route and don't have a viable path. So I think it helps make their future a lot more possible.
Well said. And the whole pro blockchain, pro tokenized asset approach has been in place, or has been put into place rather, with the SEC, and also just earlier in March of 2025, the OCC, and I believe also in 2025, the FDIC have also issued dated guidance, interpretive letters, trying to clarify what services and products can be offered by banks to current customers and clients who are trying to engage in this ecosystem. So yeah, I would say that overall, right, the outlook and the headset and sort of market sentiment has gone from being cautiously optimistic to more just plain optimistic.
Yep.
So, and I know that you had mentioned, the importance of internal controls, having a plan in place prior to buying any assets in this space for any wallet management and all the rest. Is there any one piece of advice, or is there any one question that you and your team are having to answer most often, as you have clients that are talking about, thinking about entering into the broader tokenized asset space via the IPO route or some other ways?
The I think the biggest piece when it comes to is around wallet structure, right? You mentioned the internal controls like we talked about earlier briefly, but have walking them through the capabilities of what digital assets can offer with a self-custodial option versus the traditional bank or having a qualified custodian like a Coinbase and knowing your assets are at a third party, talking them through the various differences between the two, the importance of the two. Because one definitely has a easier administrative burden, right? If you just put your
Yep.
simple username and password, it's like any other website that we have.
Yep.
But then the controls around that, right? What are the two factors in order to
Hmm.
initiate and authorize transactions? What's the security if you have self-custodial? Is who has the private keys? How are they backed up? So talking clients through those various options, I think, is where we're seeing. I don't really call it like a pain point, right? But it's a question we get all the time of what do you see with your other clients and what do you see as best practice, right? So there's a couple different routes to go, both with my professional opinion, both with my auditor opinion, and then both with my personal opinion of where what answer would suit you when it comes to that. So I just like to lay out the various
Yep.
options and talk them through the pros and cons.
Well said, right? Because every client is obviously different, and the firm itself has obviously different levels of in-house legal knowledge too.
Mhm.
So I would say sort of that, and also the sort of risk appetite is also going to play a role in that. But I won't ask you to answer any of those, obviously. But we're tossing out some other points that might play
Mhm.
a role there. Um, so in terms of sort of what are you and your team, right? So right now, uh, as of our conversation, it is March 25th. So we're already done with the first quarter of 2025. So if I were to ask you to give me your most solid forecast or expectation for the balance of the year, what is that going to be in terms of blockchain and tokenized assets?
Um, yeah, I mean, for 2025, I think we're going to continually see movement on the regulatory front. I think we'll see more and more companies not to the same scale, but following what MicroStrategy has done,
Mhm,
and putting that on their balance sheet just to see the success that Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy have had. Um, kind of alluded to that earlier, but I think we're going to see more and more companies do that, particularly on the public company side. You're
mhm.
seeing a lot of institutional companies get into this. There's a lot of ETFs popping up now that in 2024
Yes.
we had Bitcoin ETF approval, shortly the Ethereum ETF approval. I believe a Solana ETF is in the works, and there's also a SUI ETF that was just registered. So I think you're going to see a lot of movement on that front for additional investors to get into the space through those types of ETF vehicles. But as far as like me and my team, I mean, what I'm excited about is continued clarity on the accounting front, right? So, not to get too into the weeds, but we had
Uh, Come on. In the weeds
in
with me. Come on, let's go.
it was an interesting release about a little over a year ago in December of 23 with the FASB announcing the new fair market value standard, which we've awaited for a while. Um, with the timing of that release, not many companies adopted it last year because it was so
Hmm.
quick and trying to figure out the various challenges to do the adoption. But
Hmm.
right now, we're working through with a lot of our private companies those standards, and as well as our public companies that effectively adopted it 1/1/24 and had the full year to go through your quarterly 10Qs, go through your 10K for the audit that we're issuing, issued now or to be issued in the next couple days.
Hmm.
But following private companies love to follow the private company disclosures and suit, and seeing that those are now live and running and companies had time to fully adopt that new measurement. It's we're at a place now where we're working with our private companies of okay, how to do this in a practical approach, right? Because there's a little bit of a lift there, finding out your principal market, finding out your price points, your accounting policy, the new disclosures, your crypto roll forwards by token. Um, so from the accounting side, I'm excited to do that and lay that framework out for a lot of companies. We're going through that new adoption of that new standard, which is something we all wanted. So we're finally
Hmm.
here. We're finally feeling it, which is nice. And I think it's going to be a lot more representative for the companies that we work with, and their financial position on their balance sheet. Instead of carrying that impaired asset at as minimal cost as possible, finally have a good value on your balance sheet for your digital assets. Um, but no, I mean, I think as a whole, 2025, we're going to see a lot of exciting pieces on the regulatory front. And then I'm curious to see where we go with tax compliance. I know
Hmm.
there's a lot of things out there right now. We're
It's a
trying
whole
to,
other level of wax, though. Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of balls up in the air, and I don't know which one's going to land first. So just trying to see where this year shakes out with the new administration is going to be interesting. So we're definitely going to be following that closely.
Well said, Mark. And Mark, it's always a absolute privilege to have you here on the podcast, and also want to publicly give Mark kudos for uh, being named partner recently. Out with them, well earned, long time coming. Mark, it was an absolute blast having you here today.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's always a pleasure. Happy to do this whenever you want, man. I'm always down to hang out.
Thanks, Mark. If you have watched this whole episode and you aren't yet a member of the NJCPA Emerging Technology Interest Group, go on to njcpa.org, Black groups, and join. And every episode of the Choose What podcast, tech and otherwise, are all online at njcpa.org/podcast, and also on Apple, Spotify, and on YouTube. And all of our crypto blockchain content, articles, podcasts, webinars, all the rest is all online at njcpa.org/hub/crypto. Uh, Thanks, everybody, and have an awesome day.